Good afternoon. My name is Faith McCreary, and for the last 2 years, my focus has been the Internet of Things, otherwise known as IoT. So I'm here today to talk about research that is done within the Industrial and Energy Solutions divisions of Intel's Internet of Things group. It was done to deepen our understanding of our priority users, validate our value proposition as a foundation for working with external partners and customers. The research focused on discovering the problems important to industrial workers, not just the technology. What we learned should have broad generalizability to others focused in the industrial space and implications for anyone looking at the impact of smart technology on workers. I'm a principal researcher and experience architect within IoT, and I'm the UX lead for Intel's Industrial division. My primary focus for the last 2 years has been on connected workers, industrial wearables, and the experiences they enable. I spend my time, much as shown here, out in the world trying to understand how industrial workers respond to the new ordinary that IoT is bringing about. What I'm going to present today is fundamentally data-based. My job for Intel and when I work with our customers is to bring an unbiased, data-anchored perspective to how we design experiences. Now, the research I'm going to be talking about today covers a range of different users and numerous moments in the life over a period of time. In part of this work, I focus on understanding how those doing industrial work, to some degree, whether they're feet in the ground industrial workers, someone who's doing operations, a supervisor, a manager, or even senior leadership, experience the world they're in today. Their perspective may differ from those that we often talk to, which is typically our customers or their customers, because they focus more on the business of managing in the industrial sector. We care about the perspective of those who are actively doing the work, as their adoption of any IoT solutions that we come up with is what makes the difference between our customers seeing a profit from their investment or not. The information that I'll be sharing today came from a wide range of research activities. Everything from mobile ethnography, which is basically if you think about putting an app on your phone and bringing people along and showing them moments in the day of your life, to in-the-field product testing. The results I'm sharing today are consistent across a very diverse set of data. Through the course of this work, we captured moments in participants' lives and what their thoughts were on different topics. Some of the places they took us are shown here. Many of the people that participated worked in connectivity challenged spaces, either due to remoteness, surrounding equipment, or security reasons such as a firewall. Of these workers who very generously shared their time and their perspectives with us, 40% of them were individual workers, people that were responsible for completing tasks, but they weren't responsible for other people. 25% came from operations, who focused in on the health of a process or a set of equipment or potentially even factory operations. 30% were managers or supervisors who basically are responsible for a team and often work closely with them for a portion of their time out in the field, as well as spending time in the office. 5% of the people that worked with us that were actively involved in the work were senior leadership, who ranged from people that were spending a small amount of time to people that spent up to almost half of their time out in the industrial spaces. Universally, these people do potentially dangerous work. It's a wide range of settings. As you can see here, you have everything from truckers to people in oil refineries, to people working in candy factories, to people running forklifts. It was a very diverse set of individuals who helped us with us. Now, oftentimes when we think about industrial workers, we don't always think about them using that much technology. But part of what we found is we've been working with a very diverse set of industrial users over the last 2 years, is that they are using quite a bit of technology both at work and at home. And much like you've seen in other sorts of enterprise software situations, technology usage in the home was often the precursor and the accelerator of technology usage in the workplace. We saw similar trends in the data when we looked at the imagined uses of these smart technologies, where augmented reality and the like are much less popular than variants of technology that systems already use the home, as you can see as you glance at this graph. So how do we use technologies that participants are already comfortable with to accelerate the use of smart technologies? It's part of the challenge of what we're doing within this space. Now, we looked at 6 priority sectors when it came to the industrial work. Certainly, any industrial worker has potential to be a connected worker to use smart technologies, but these were the sectors that we saw the strongest affinity to this smart value proposition. We looked at people and energy, which include people that were working in oil and gas, utilities, and even mining. There were people from manufacturing, a range of industries, everything from people that were creating cars to people that were doing more food processing and creating sausages or candy. A range of construction settings, including greenfield and brownfield. We looked at warehouses, both those that were connected to an industrial setting like manufacturing, as well as those that were supplying logistics for things like construction or energy, field service workers. We looked at public safety. Just think of them as the fire, the police, the military, who have a range of their own set needs, as well as field service, people that were often sent out into the world to help keep these smart things working in relationship to industrial devices. Now, if you think about what we're talking about is a very wide range of research, but we had 6 guiding questions that kind of framed no matter what research activity we did and used that to tie all the different pieces of information together. We had a number of shared background questions in the beginning, like what sector were you in and what's your job role and things like that. Well, we also looked at these larger 6 questions when we looked at the in-the-moment research. Think of these questions as guardrails for the kinds of information that we gathered in those different activities. And while I'm not going to go over the details of the research protocols that we use, these questions help you understand what kinds of detailed information was gathered. People would work their way through the question sets, regardless of whether they were doing mobile ethnography or part of a pilot, basically from left to right. We focused on the beginning on really what were the things they wore today, because if you think about industrial workers, they're already wearing a lot of gear. They have a lot of things they carry around, and they have problems that are associated with it, things they like, things they don't like. And by understanding what is going on in today's world, we can help predict how the smart technology introduction is going to change it. We also had them show us where they were working today, whether we did through mobile ethnography or we followed them over the course of their day. We've looked at the typical places where they work and where they saw the biggest opportunities for smart technologies to help them. We also looked at what do they imagine these smart things potentially doing for them. And in this case, we focused primarily on what we call brainy wearables, things that they could carry along with them. Although certainly in this space, wearables are both a point of data collection as well as a point of data service delivery. So any of these wearables must exist in the larger context of the industrial work. We also, as part of our business proposition, had specific usages that we were looking to prioritize. We also wanted to understand exactly how is it that people see these things adopted. If you think about smart technologies, they have a chance, the ability to pull back the curtain on your work and what you're doing and what your team is doing. So part of what we wanted to understand is, if with this increased visibility, what would worry people? What was the things that they thought that would potentially be shared that they didn't want shared, that could potentially be obstacles to them adopting this technology? And lastly, we took them through activities that focused on what would happen when it came to adopting. How would they get their teams to adopt them? What do they think the value proposition would be? What would be the things that would convince their teams to do this? Now, you may be wondering, how do we get people with varying levels of technological understanding to engage in a meaningful discussion of boundary setting required for these studies. Certainly, no one besides, potentially some of the people on this phone call really know what all those smart technologies can do for them. But we did it by really not mentioning the technology at all. Instead, we focused on a brain like the one you have, I have, we all have, a brain that we well understand what it might be able to do for us, unlike the pesky technology that people often don't know. And we asked people to imagine that they were giving brains, and when they were thinking about the future, to parts of their building, to their gear, to their vehicles, whatever it was that they thought it could do something for them. We asked them things like, what would you give a brain to? What would that item be able to do for you or with you that it can't do now? And how would it change your life? And we use that to frame our understanding of the coming transformation. As we looked across this really vast amount of data, what we saw was that there was 4 reoccurring value themes that, regardless of whether you were someone that was feet in the ground or you were a senior leader, there was 4 sets of value vectors that appeared over and over again. And these were the core value proposition for connected workers from their perspective. And what this, by looking at these value themes across, it helped us decide where to focus. It helped us understand, as we were thinking about introducing technology, what were the things that were going to attract people to use it. It helped us understand how people will judge the things that we were developing. The 4 vectors were, and this probably comes as not a lot of surprise if you've worked with industrial workers, that a lot of work is focused on increasing productivity, that regardless of whether you're an industrial worker or a knowledge worker, you're looking for things to help you do your job more efficiently. In industrial spaces, where it's often a very risky proposition and people worry about coming home in the same condition they went to work, they also saw these technologies as a way to save lives. And the one that was perhaps most surprising as we were talking with people that were working with these workers was they were also seeing these technologies as incredibly valuable when it came to increasing their peace of mind, whether it was worrying about themselves when they were going into a confined space, or worrying about their team that was out in the world and that they couldn't always see and couldn't always tell if they were okay, or were they in a man-down situation. That in part, a large part of the value of these technology comes with increasing their peace of mind. And of course, in any work situation, you're also concerned about saving money. How can you make your processes, your product more efficiently? And certainly industrial settings are no different, and that's a primary driver, especially in places like manufacturing. Now, if we look across this range of data, there was basically 6 key learnings. And this is at a very high level. Certainly there's a lot more detailed information under it, but since we've only got an hour, I will stick to the high level. We're talking about some of the things that we found that have implications past just worker wearables or the immediate solutions that we're potentially offering in the industrial space. And I'll go through each one of these individually. I'm not going to read them here now, but we will go through each of them. And as you think about this, and if you want to reach out or have questions, this is just a little bit of what we learned. They'll give you a flavor of what are the things that really frame industrial experiences from the perspective of those who are actually doing the work. Now, we often, talk about safety in industrial settings. And what was interesting as we talked to people about a lot of different possibilities, and they talked to us, and keep in mind that we didn't give them a list and say, what things do you care about? What we asked them is when they were out, either when we were observing them and we saw things, or when they were out and doing a mobile ethnography exercise, was them to talk about what were the hazards they were concerned about in a particular environment. If you remember back, one of the areas that we focused on was the places where they worked. And as we were looking at the places where they worked, we looked at what were the hazards that they were really concerned about. And what surprised me somewhat is that the hazard that they were most concerned about is not that they could fall and die. Certainly they're concerned about that, or that there's these horrible noise levels or toxic gases. What they're worried about is other people, and they see other people as potentially the biggest safety obstacle around. Because oftentimes, even industrial workers who work in settings that are very dangerous, safety is not always top of mind. People get distracted. Things happen. And certainly when we looked at the experiences the participants that we dealt with had 77% said they had been injured, or someone that they were directly responsible for had been injured to the point requiring medical care in the last year. 32% rated their concern with work hazards as a 9 or 10, where 1 was little to no concern and 10 was very concerned. So certainly they're aware of the dangers. But they also know the mistakes happen. Sometimes those around them are distracted, they miscalculate, they misjudge, or even are just unaware. Maybe they're a new worker who doesn't really know what the hazards are. People don't always speak up when they're not licensed or trained. Sometimes they just plain ignore safety practices. And oftentimes people that have been in the career for a while, they sort of become immune to it. They're like, after 7 or 8 years, we had numerous people talk to us about that sort of uptick in accidents because people start paying quite as much attention because they've been doing it for a while and nothing's happened. And industrial workers are, they're a realistic bunch. They get that. But at the same time, they, don't really want or need an endless stream of safety alerts to distract them, potentially make them less safe. So that's certainly a factor for us to think about when we're designing. Nor do they want, have their time spent being nagged by others about safety. So as much as they care about these hazards, things like fall hazards or moving vehicles or excessive temperatures or UV, those are all hazards that are important for us to help manage. But we also need to do it in a way that will help people proactively act as opposed to just nag. How do we help them avoid putting themselves and others at risk? How do we get the worker to proactively modify their behavior when an immediate risk to others or from a particular hazard? Because what you find oftentimes when you go out and you work with these individuals is a lot of times safety gear doesn't get worn unless people think they're really going to need it. But there's a lot of invisible hazards, things like toxic gas or other items that you just don't always see coming. And sometimes you can't have 100% awareness. So one potential value from these perspective is to help make the people that are at the middle of these systems more aware. But how we make people aware, how we help people detect hazards, what is a difference based on who you were. That if it came to people that were responsible others, think of that as supervisors, team managers, even people in operations, or people that were in leadership, they were all like, oh, we absolutely love the idea of monitoring the larger environment or monitoring the individual. Both will help us have less accidents, they'll help us save money, they will help us better understand and avoid those things that raise our insurance rates. However, when you look at the individual worker, the people that weren't really responsible for anyone else, the people that were out in the field and actively doing the work, what you saw was that they were not nearly as crazy about monitoring the larger environment. They were much happier if we create solutions where they're monitored. And that largely had to do, it was the concept that they thought large-scale monitoring would be easier if they just did the larger environment. They thought they'd be less likely to know they were being monitored if it was done in a larger environment. Whereas if you do it at the individual, they thought that they would have a better sense and more and control over it. So one of the things we have to consider if we think about dealing with safety issues in IoT in the industrial space is how do we decrease resistance to solutions by putting the individual at the center? How do we do it in a way that doesn't feel creepy or invasive? Because as much as the people who are probably making the purchasing decisions are finding monitoring the larger environment just fine, the people who are having to live with them day and work with them day in, day out are probably going to try and find ways around it because they just find it invasive. Now, we looked across a range of different types of problems that they had. And it wasn't just safety, and certainly productivity obstacles came up. And by far the biggest one for these individuals was finding things, whether it was finding information or finding the resources they need. Over half of them, when they were going and think of all these different research activities we did, over half of them highlighted the fact that they were having difficulties finding what they needed to do their work. Industrial workers are often in places without the same ready access to information and data that we other workers have come to expect. They often work with their hands and have to put down their work in order to access information, even when information or data is available. And oftentimes it's not, because you think they're often working in connectivity restricted areas. And even if the information is available hands-free, they were likely only be able to glance away from their tasks for a few moments with safety. So how do we integrate the sharing information with the task? How do we provide these workers with real-time information and assistance that they ask for, as well as proactively provide these workers with contextually relevant information and data? How do we do it in a way that does not overwhelm or overload them with information? If you look over on the right, there's a list of the things that have the most impact on them. Certainly, there's a lot of things about getting delays in information, not being able to find information, not having needed parts or supplies because no one knew they were out, difficulties in finding resources, everything from, oh, I can't find a ladder to, oh, I just walled up my expensive tool in a wall and now I can't find it. But also in industrial spaces, they often called out that poor management or supervision. And that may not be a problem that we can solve with technology, but it's certainly, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, it's certainly an issue that is likely to impact the rollout of the products that we're developing. Now, when we looked across all the different things that people brought up as pain points and things that they imagined that these smart technologies to be able to help them with, productivity-related challenges were, really the biggest pain point for most workers, other than those in public safety or energy, which were much more focused on safety, as you can see here. That which sector you're in does make a difference as far as where your focus is. How do we create solutions that can increase safety at the same time, increasing worker productivity are likely to be big winners? Because as much as people say they focus on productivity, it's not an either-or situation. And in fact, much of what we're focusing on in Intel are focused on safety and thinking that we can scale that across industrial sectors who face safety challenges. And certainly our partners are seeing similar trends with their customers, where to get the spends on safety, they throw a little something for productivity. That by combining the two, is much more a winning value proposition. And fortunately, the technologies like location finding that are great for man-down scenarios also may be used for things like asset tracking, which can help people find the resources they need, can help reduce security issues and tools and materials wandering off, and go directly to the bottom line of a business. If you remember, we asked people to imagine what would they give a brain to? And what were those priority uses that they thought was most important for us as part of what we're doing in developing and defining solutions for industrial and energy spaces? What were the ones they thought were really, really important? What places did industrial workers imagine smart technology to solve today's problems? And when we found and we watched, we were involved in this process, everything from workshops to pilots to just asking them to do design thinking around this. What we found was it wasn't just about solving problems. They also considered, did they enjoy what they were doing? Like, for instance, things that would help them get rid of really boring or routine work was really rated highly, as you can see here. Or, was the work closely associated with their sense of autonomy, in which case having something along all the time may make them feel like they really don't want to use it. What this means from a practical sense when you're developing and designing solutions for this space is there's not a one-to-one correspondence between perceived challenges and managed uses of any solutions. That in part, you've got to work with the people and see what the differences are. Now, if you look on the left, you see the uses that people most imagined most frequently when they were thinking about braining in a range of industrial spaces. People rated their impact on the way they work. Although, less frequently imagined, these uses above did emerge as the most likely way to transform the way we're looking. And you see those on the right. Those are the ones that people maybe did not imagine quite as frequently, but they thought if they happened, they would fundamentally transform how they work. And the three that had the most transformative impact from the perspective of the industrial workers was ongoing individual monitoring for safety purposes. Think about the fact that they want it to be individual monitoring, not in the larger environment. They're looking to keep workers from taking unsafe actions. If you think back to the problem they saw with other people being the biggest risk to their safety, you start understanding how preventing people from taking unsafe actions is important to them. And also things like asset monitoring and alerting, both because it would reduce things like theft and other practical problems that every business faces in industrial spaces, as well as helping the individual worker be more productive by helping them find what they need to complete their work, to find the people, to find the resources. And if they were out in the field in an environment they didn't know, they could more easily find what they need. Now, I'm not going to go through these imagined uses in detail, but when we're working with partners, we use these usages to define specific use cases for specific projects. When imagined solutions to their top problems, it helped to keep in mind what usages the worker expected these technologies to bring about. And we can basically match together the technological capabilities with the usages and the value from a customer user perspective. Now, much like whether people care the most about productivity or safety or security, depending on what sector you were, this heat map shows you how these priorities differ as you look across the different sectors. Again, I'm not going to go into the details a lot, and which sector you care about really depends on which sector you're working in. But notice that there's differences. The big black squares, those are the things that are most important to that sector. One thing that's important to note as you look at this heat map and you think about like the difference between real-time active assistance, where like maybe you're helping with an exoskeleton to make people stronger versus getting advice as you go along, or maybe it's just auto-handling routine tasks, is that this was based solely on what people imagined. That we worked with people and pilots, but we also did a lot of design thinking around where they saw these smart technologies potentially working. And what we found was that when we actually went through the process and did the initial thinking about what possibilities were, we'd iterate and refine these concepts as we moved into pilot. One of the things that we found was that this heat map is really about people's uses, that there's an interdependency from a technical perspective. For instance, you might expect real-time communication information would be needed to make any of the imagined uses technically feasible, and you'd be right. The same goes for like location-based services. But people, when they were thinking about them and imagining them, they were seeing them as different, that the value it brought to them was different. Now, one thing to think about, depending on what audience you're working with, if you see the relative frequency is low for something that you expect to be higher, ask yourself why. Is there an alternative in that space that may already exist? Could workers, for instance, be concerned about the loss of autonomy by the fact that maybe they're going to be monitored? Is there a way that you can maybe adjust the technology so that this usage will become more attractive to workers? And oftentimes when we think about introducing smart technologies into the space, we often think about we start with a very manual and we get to it's fully autonomous. But if you look at the workers or the operations people or even the leadership, they're seeing it as a much more of a spectrum, that there are certain activities that, we really don't want any help on. We may see them as things that we get seen as being an excellent worker because we do them, or it may be something that we just have an intrinsic enjoyment of. Workers expect this brainy future. They'll still be able to do their existing ways of doing things if they want. They want to work with brainy things like with people. Maybe it's a person that helps them, like this robot shown here that toddles off to get them what they need and then comes back with it. Or maybe they're a team where they work hand in hand with a robot. Sometimes the brainy thing takes the lead. Like maybe they're just there to help them when it needs it, or maybe it just goes off and does it completely by itself. That people are envisioning when they think about the work that this full spectrum of relationships with the technology is not just either or, and we must take that into account as we sit there and develop these brainy technologies for this space. Now you might ask yourself, why wouldn't people just want brainy things to do their job? And there's a lot deeper discussion, and we can talk about more a little bit later in the presentation. But there's certain things that they just do because they love. There's certain things that they don't want to be seen. And what the bottom line is that we can't just plan on the industry of the future being the far right of the spectrum. We have to plan for a future that supports this full spectrum of envisioned relationships. If you think about it, these workers are already carrying a lot of stuff. And from their perspective, they like the idea of smart technologies, but the smart technologies should not require them to do anything, carry anything new. Things that use the things I already use, but use them in different ways to deliver value are seen as like, wow, that's awesome. How do I get that brainy thing plus the original value? How do I solve problems, but don't create new ones with me? They like the idea of multitasking technologies that can do multiple things for them. That brainy should talk to brainy, that they shouldn't have to be the human connector between all these smart technologies like they often are today. They want to see it integrated and working together. And they're already using technologies out in the space. And one of their concerns is making sure that everything that we introduce, what we develop, what we bring into their world will work with what they already use. So they don't have to basically redo everything from scratch. There's a lot of different ways that people want to interact with Brainy, and here you can get an idea of some of the different perspectives. That, for instance, if you're in field service, you love the idea of voice because you're probably out in the world and doing tasks and repairing things, and you really could do things hand-free. Whereas oftentimes in manufacturing, they were sort of ambivalent about some things because they're like, well, it's kind of noisy in my environment. I don't know if I can do that. Whereas if you were in a warehouse, you're very much into hands-free. So you start thinking about the context in which people are working, and you start mapping out the types of interactions that are going to be most valuable to them. One thing to keep in mind is that heat map was based on what people are already familiar with. So as we introduce new technologies, this is likely to evolve. Now, when we think about user adoption, one of the biggest hurdles that workers raised when it came to actually getting this adopted in their workplace, by their teams, by themselves, was the idea of trust. Trust came down to, can I trust that technology reliably do what I say it will do? Is it like a big brother that's watching or oversharing everything I do? And some workers just had this sense that they weren't in control and they might not be able to trust their judgment. So could they trust it with their life? They weren't sure. Could they trust it with their reputation? They're not really sure because they're not sure who's using the information. Of the participants across these activities who made it through the missions, only 5 out of all those, over 100 people had no privacy concerns when it came to these smart technologies. And that's, a very small percentage of the number of industrial workers we talked to. People also had concerns around costs because a lot of these settings they know are somewhat conservative. They're not going to adopt things unless they have the new technologies. They also had a fair number, in some cases, people who had, and this was primarily people who'd had technologies introduced in the past. What they had found was that they kind of got burnt by them. They were hard to use, hard to learn. They were heavy to carry. They had too many wires. They were plain awkward. And those were the things that they thought were most likely to prevent people from adopting. Now, when it came to what their perspective on their organization and what was driving adoption with their organization as opposed to the people that were at the center of this, that for their organizations, it was really about value. That if you look on the red, on the far right, it's basically, we typically wait until there's been some proof that technology delivers this promised value, even if it's a bit kludgy. And that represents the somewhat conservative nature of the industrial spaces. The only exception here really was the public safety workers who saw their organizations as less willing to adopt unless it was very mature and proven. They didn't want kludgy, in part because they were in a very high-risk setting. And lastly, when it came to what were they sensitive about from a privacy perspective, it really came down to both the data and the action. Over 38% were convinced that these smart technologies that we were going to introduce, that were bringing functionality that they valued, were going to tattle on them. That somehow it would allow this unprecedented visibility into their mundane and not so mundane activities of their daily life. Think about it. The augmented reality that makes you more productive by connecting with a remote expert can also enable micromanagers to dog your every footstep at work. The smart safety vest that monitors your vitals and can let your company know about a health condition you may not want to share. And think about this industrial space where oftentimes something as simple as a messy work area may be labeled a performance problem. Visibility into some of these things can get you fired. The things that people were most concerned about was process instability, physical location, like basically, do you always know where I'm at? Do you know where I'm working or not working? And are they sleeper over fatigue? That oftentimes they work in extreme conditions and they were thinking that they would be getting in trouble because sometimes they push past what they probably really should be doing. What they found, what did they tell us about what would help? How do they imagine that they would be able to get some of the control back in terms of what they do today? Because you think about today, people, close a door, put a physical distance from their manager. There's lots of ways that they can control what is known about them in work today. And what they're looking for is the smart technologies that we are creating to give them some of that control back, to alert them when they're being monitored. If you think about that one, like environmental monitoring or individual monitoring, that's why people prefer individual monitoring. They want to be able to know, what does my employer know about me? If they know every single second, that could be a problem for me. And in fact, what people told us over and over again was they were looking for these smart technologies to be smart in the moment, but forgetful over time. Some places and some of the industrial workers we talked with, that their unions were going so far as to negotiate lower prices with their customer, if only these technologies would basically only save 5 or 10 minutes of data and forget about it unless there was an accident or some incident. People want to have aggregated information as opposed to individual information tracked. It's one thing to know, here are the trends for my division. It's another thing to know, here's what you did, and you shouldn't be doing that. They're looking for technology that will warn them we're about to do something that will get them in trouble at work. Because if you're smart enough to tell me when I'm going to stay safe, it's also could potentially be smart enough to warn you before you're going to get into trouble. They're looking for the basically equivalent of a privacy button that they push it or turn it on, and basically they go dark in this land of smart technologies. That was very much a whirlwind tour of the industrial spaces, and certainly whatever usage or whatever value proposition you decide on, of taking a privacy mindful approach is going to be key to getting it adopted. But you have a deeper understanding now of these industrial workers and what they're looking for in terms of smart industrial experiences. You have the technological skills to help make some of what these industrial workers are envisioning reality. We have lots of opportunities in this space, but only if we can reliably connect the workers in many places where they work and in ways that align with how they want to work. It's a world of incredible possibilities to transform industrial work for the better, but only if we can earn a place in the lives of the workers in the middle of it all, the workers who clearly have expectations about what is necessary. So how will you take this knowledge and turn it into smart products and services that everyone will love, from feet in the ground workers to those in senior leadership? How will you take this information and turn it into reality? Thank you for your time and attention.